The morning sun broke through the thick London fog, casting long shadows across the quiet streets. Inside Kensington Palace, Kate sat by the window of her private sitting room, her hands wrapped around a cup of tea that had long gone cold. Her eyes were fixed on the gardens below, but she wasn't really seeing them. Her mind was somewhere else entirely, lost in memories that felt both distant and painfully close. William found her there, just as he had every morning for the past 3 weeks. He didn't say anything at first. What was there to say that hadn't already been said? Instead, he simply sat down beside her, their shoulders touching in that familiar way that had brought comfort through so many storms. But this storm was different. This one had shaken the very foundation of who they were. It had started 6 months ago with a phone call that changed everything. Kate's younger brother, James, had been in a car accident. The doctors had done everything they could, but some things were beyond even the best medical care. For weeks, Kate had split her time between royal duties and hospital visits, her smile growing more strained with each public appearance. William had watched helplessly as the woman he loved carried a burden that was slowly breaking her heart. The palace had released careful statements about family matters requiring attention, but the truth was becoming harder to hide. Kate's eyes, once so bright and full of life, now carried a heaviness that no amount of makeup could conceal. At charity events, she would pause mid-conversation, her mind clearly elsewhere. The press had begun to notice, their cameras capturing moments of vulnerability that the palace communications team worked tirelessly to manage. James had been more than just Kate's brother. He had been her closest confidant, the one person who remembered her before the titles and the protocol, before the world had learned her name. They had grown up together in Bucklebury, climbing trees and sharing secrets, dreaming of futures that seemed both impossible and inevitable. Even after Kate had married into the royal family, James had remained her anchor to the life she had known. The reminder that beneath the designer clothes and official engagements, she was still Catherine Middleton from Berkshire. The children had sensed something was wrong. George, with his serious eyes that seemed far too old for his age, had asked his mother why she cried at night. Charlotte had grown quieter, clinging to Kate's hand during school drop-offs. Even young Louis, usually so full of energy and mischief, had become subdued, as if the sadness in the house had seeped into his small bones. William had tried to be strong for all of them. He had rearranged his schedule, canceled appearances, and taken on more of the children's routines. But he was struggling too, not just with watching Kate's pain, but with his own grief. James had become like a brother to him as well, someone who treated him like a regular person, who made jokes at his expense and never bowed or showed deference. In a world where everyone watched their words around him, James had been refreshingly normal. The palace staff moved through the halls with quiet efficiency, their usual chatter replaced by whispered conversations and sympathetic glances. They had watched Kate blossom from a nervous newlywed into a confident princess, and now they watched her struggle with a grief that even royal training couldn't prepare someone for. The household had rallied around the family, making sure the children were cared for, that meals appeared even when no one had an appetite, that the machinery of royal life continued to turn even as the heart of the household was breaking. Kate's parents had been constant presences, arriving early and staying late, their own grief compounded by watching their daughter suffer. Carol Middleton, usually so composed and capable, had aged years in mere weeks. Michael stood helpless, a man who had built a successful business and raised confident children, now facing a problem that no amount of hard work could fix. Pippa came when she could, though her own grief made it difficult to be the support she wanted to be. The doctors had prepared them as best they could. They had used gentle words and medical terms, but the message was clear. James's injuries were too severe. There would be no miracle recovery, no sudden turn for the better. It was only a matter of time. Kate had heard the words, nodded at the appropriate moments, asked the right questions, but inside she was screaming. This couldn't be happening. Not to James. Not to her bright, funny, kind brother who had so much life still to live. William had been there for every difficult conversation, every devastating update. He had held Kate when she couldn't stand, spoken for her when words wouldn't come, and made decisions when she was too overwhelmed to think. He had been her rock, just as he had promised to be on their wedding day. But late at night, when Kate finally fell into an exhausted sleep, William would stand at the window of their bedroom and let his own tears fall. He was losing someone he cared about, but more than that, He was watching the love of his life break apart, and there was nothing he could do to stop it. The palace had quietly made arrangements. Extra security had been put in place at the hospital. Private rooms had been secured. The medical staff had signed additional confidentiality agreements. Everything possible was being done to give the family privacy in their darkest hour. But William and Kate both knew that eventually the truth would come out. The British public, who had followed their love story with such joy, would soon share in their sorrow. 3 weeks ago, on a Tuesday morning that had started like any other, the phone call they had been dreading finally came. Kate had been getting dressed for a scheduled appearance at a children's hospital when William answered. She had known immediately from the look on his face. Without a word, they had rushed to the hospital. Protocol and schedules forgotten. James had slipped away peacefully that afternoon, surrounded by family, with Kate holding his hand and whispering all the things she needed him to know. The funeral had been arranged for the following week. It would be private, the palace announced, a family affair away from public scrutiny. But William and Kate both knew that their private grief would become public knowledge. There was no hiding from the cameras forever, no escape from the duty that came with their positions. Soon they would have to face the nation, to show their pain while maintaining the dignity expected of them. Now, sitting in the quiet of the morning, Kate turned to William with tears streaming down her face. "How do we do this?" she whispered. "How do we stand up there and say goodbye when I can barely breathe?" William pulled her close, his own eyes wet. "Together," he said simply. "We do it together, just like everything else." But even as he said the words, he wondered if together would be enough this time. The day of the funeral arrived with gray skies that seemed fitting for the occasion. Kate stood in front of her mirror, her lady's maid helping her into a simple black dress that she had never imagined wearing for this purpose. Her hands trembled as she fastened the pearl earrings that James had given her for her 30th birthday. He had saved for months to afford them, insisting that his sister deserved something special. Now they felt heavy against her skin, weighted with memories she wasn't ready to face. Downstairs, William was helping George with his tie. The young prince had insisted on wearing one, wanting to look grown up for the occasion. "Why did Uncle James have to go, Papa?" George asked, his voice small and confused. William crouched down to his son's level, choosing his words carefully. "Sometimes people get hurt so badly that their bodies can't keep going, even when we want them to stay more than anything in the world." George's lower lip trembled. "Will Mama be all right?" The question broke something inside William, but he kept his voice steady. "Mama is very sad right now, but she has us to help her feel better. We all need to be brave today." Charlotte appeared in the doorway, her black dress pressed perfectly, her hair pulled back in a neat bun that made her look older than her years. She had been crying, her eyes red and puffy despite her best efforts to be composed. "Is it time to go?" she asked quietly. William nodded, gathering both children close for a moment. Louis was being looked after by his nanny, deemed too young to attend such a somber occasion. Kate had agonized over the decision, but ultimately agreed that some things were too heavy for a child so small to carry. The drive to the church was made in silence, the family car moving through streets that had been cleared by police. Word had spread despite the palace's best efforts at privacy, and people had begun to gather along the route. They held flowers and signs, their faces etched with sympathy. Kate stared out the window, surprised by the number of people who had come. She had known, intellectually, that the public cared about her family, but seeing the evidence of that care made her grief feel both more manageable and more overwhelming at the same time. The church itself was small and old, tucked away in the Berkshire countryside where Kate had grown up. It was the same church where she had attended Sunday services as a child, where she had sung in the choir and giggled during particularly long sermons. James had been christened here, and now they would say goodbye to him here. The symmetry of it made Kate's chest tighten with emotion she wasn't sure she could contain. Inside, the church was filled with familiar faces. School friends of James looking lost and too young to be attending a funeral, business colleagues of Michael's sitting respectfully in the back pews. Family friends who had known James since he was a baby, and in the front row, Kate's parents looking smaller somehow, diminished by their grief. Carol's shoulders shook with silent sobs while Michael sat rigid, his jaw clenched so tightly it must have hurt. Pippa was there too, her husband James standing protectively beside her. She caught Kate's eye as they entered and offered a sad smile that held a lifetime of sisterly love and shared pain. They had lost their brother, but in that moment Kate was grateful she still had her sister. The thought made her feel guilty immediately. How could she be grateful for anything on a day like this? The service began with a hymn that had been one of James's favorites. Kate's voice cracked on the first line and she couldn't continue. William's hand found hers, squeezing gently, offering silent support. George and Charlotte stood close, their small bodies pressed against their parents, seeking comfort and trying to provide it in equal measure. The vicar spoke about loss and love, about the brevity of life and the eternal nature of memory. His words were kind and appropriate, but Kate barely heard them. Her attention was fixed on the coffin at the front of the church, unable to fully comprehend that her brother was inside it. When it came time for eulogies, Michael Middleton stood first. He walked to the front slowly, a piece of paper trembling in his hands. "My son," he began, his voice breaking immediately. He paused, collecting himself, then continued. "My son was the best of us. He was kind when it would have been easier to be cruel. He was generous when he could have been selfish. He loved deeply and laughed often, and the world is darker without his light." Michael's voice failed him then, and he stood at the podium, silent tears running down his face. After a long moment, he simply said, "I love you, James. I will always love you," and returned to his seat. Pippa spoke next, sharing stories from their childhood that brought brief smiles to tear-stained faces. She talked about James's terrible singing voice and his even worse dancing, about the time he had accidentally dyed their dog green, and the summer he had taught himself to juggle. Her voice was stronger than their father's, but the pain behind it was just as evident. "He was my little brother," she said, looking directly at Kate. "But he was also my friend, my confidant, and one of the best people I have ever known. He loved his family fiercely, and he was so proud of his sisters. We will miss him every day for the rest of our lives." Then it was Kate's turn. She had written something, words she had labored over late at night when sleep wouldn't come. But as she stood at the front of the church looking out at the sea of faces all watching her with pity and concern, she realized she couldn't read what she had prepared. Those words felt too formal, too distant from the truth of her grief. Instead, she folded the paper and spoke from her heart. "James was my baby brother," she began, her voice barely above a whisper. The church was so quiet that everyone could hear her anyway. "When he was born, I was 5 years old, and I thought he was the most amazing thing I had ever seen. I promised our parents I would always look after him, always keep him safe." Her voice broke and she had to stop, pressing her hand to her mouth to hold back a sob. William half rose from his seat, ready to go to her, but she shook her head slightly. "She needed to do this. I didn't keep him safe," she continued, tears streaming freely now. "I couldn't protect him from this, and that knowledge will haunt me for the rest of my life. But what I can do is remember him. I can remember his laugh, which was infectious and ridiculous. I can remember how he always knew when I needed a phone call, even when we were hundreds of miles apart. I can remember the way he loved unconditionally without judgment or expectation. I can remember that he made me a better person just by being in the world." Kate paused, looking at the coffin through her tears. "James knew who I was before anyone else did. He knew me when I was just Kate before the titles and the duties and the cameras. And he never treated me any differently when all of that changed. To him, I was always just his sister. That gift of normalcy, of being seen as myself, was something I treasured more than he probably ever knew. I wish I had told him that more often. I wish I had told him a lot of things. How proud I was of him. How much I admired his kindness. How grateful I was that he was my brother. But I think somehow he knew. He always knew." Kate's voice dropped to almost a whisper. "I love you, James. I will carry you with me always, in every step I take, in every smile I manage to give our children, in every moment of joy I eventually find again. You will never be gone, not really, because you will live in my heart until it stops beating, and even then I believe we will meet again." She couldn't continue. The sobs she had been holding back overtook her, and she stood at the podium, unable to move, unable to speak, simply crying for everything they had lost. William was there in an instant, his arms around her, guiding her gently back to their seat. George and Charlotte wrapped themselves around their mother, their own tears mixing with hers. The church was filled with the sound of weeping, the grief of one family becoming the grief of everyone present. The rest of the service passed in a blur. More hymns were sung, more prayers were offered, and finally it was time to leave. The pallbearers, including William and Michael, carried the coffin out into the gray afternoon. At the graveside, Kate stood between her parents, supported by them and supporting them in turn. As the coffin was lowered into the ground, she felt something inside her break completely. This was real. This was final. James was truly gone. As she threw a handful of earth onto the coffin, traditional and terrible, Kate felt William's presence beside her again. He didn't try to stop her tears or offer empty platitudes. He simply stood with her, sharing the burden of a grief too heavy for one person to carry alone. Around them, others said their goodbyes, but Kate barely noticed. Her world had narrowed to this moment, this grave, this impossible loss. When it was finally over, when everyone had paid their respects and begun to drift away, Kate remained. She stood at the grave for a long time, memorizing its location as if she could ever forget where her brother was laid to rest. "Come on, love," William said gently, his voice rough with his own tears. "It's time to go home." But as Kate let herself be led away, she wondered if anywhere would ever feel like home again without James in the world. The days following the funeral blurred together in a haze of sympathy cards and flower arrangements that filled every room of Kensington Palace. Kate moved through them mechanically, reading messages from people around the world who had been touched by James's story. Prime ministers and presidents had sent their condolences. Children had drawn pictures of angels. Strangers had shared their own stories of loss, trying to offer comfort through shared experience. It was overwhelming and humbling, and Kate found herself unable to process any of it fully. William watched his wife carefully, noting how she smiled at the children but forgot to eat, how she thanked the staff but seemed to look through them rather than at them. He had seen grief before in his own life. When his mother had died, he understood the peculiar emptiness that loss created. But watching Kate navigate this pain was different. He couldn't fix it, couldn't make it better, and the helplessness was eating away at him. The palace communications team had been working overtime to manage the public response. Photos from the funeral had somehow leaked to the press. Images of Kate sobbing at the graveside, of William supporting his wife while carrying his own grief. The headlines ranged from sympathetic to invasive, with speculation about how Kate would cope and whether she would take extended leave from royal duties. William had wanted to sue to demand retractions to protect Kate from any additional pain. But she had stopped him with a gentle hand on his arm and sad eyes that said fighting would only make it worse. George had started having nightmares. He would wake up crying, convinced that someone else he loved was going to disappear. Kate would go to him, holding him until the fear subsided, whispering reassurances she wasn't sure she believed herself. Charlotte had become quiet and withdrawn, spending hours in her room drawing pictures that grew progressively darker. Even Louis, who was too young to fully understand what had happened, seemed to sense the sadness in the house and clung to his parents with unusual intensity. 3 weeks after the funeral, the palace announced that Kate would be returning to public duties. The decision had been agonizing. Part of her wanted to hide away from the world forever, to never face another camera or forced smile. But another part of her, the part that James had always believed in, knew that staying hidden would only make things worse. James had been proud of her work, had championed her causes and supported her efforts to make a difference. Giving up now would be a betrayal of everything he had believed she could be. Her first engagement was at a hospice for terminally ill children. The choice was intentional, a way to channel her grief into something meaningful. Kate had always been passionate about early childhood development and mental health, but now those causes felt personal in a way they never had before. She understood what it meant to watch someone you loved slip away, to feel helpless in the face of suffering. William accompanied her, both for support and because he genuinely wanted to be there. As they walked through the hospice corridors, past rooms where children fought battles they were too young to be fighting, Kate felt something shift inside her. Her grief was still there, still sharp and painful, but it was no longer the only thing she could feel. There was also compassion for these families, admiration for the staff who cared for the children with such dedication, and a renewed sense of purpose. In one room, they met a little girl named Emma, who was 7 years old and loved butterflies. Her walls were covered with drawings and photos of different species, bright splashes of color in an otherwise clinical space. Emma's mother sat beside the bed, her face lined with exhaustion and worry, but she smiled when Kate and William entered. "She's been so excited to meet you," the mother whispered. "She's been practicing her curtsy for days." Kate sat down beside the bed, taking Emma's small hand in hers. "I hear you love butterflies," she said gently. Emma nodded enthusiastically, launching into a detailed explanation of the different types she had learned about. As the little girl talked, Kate found herself genuinely engaged, asking questions and sharing her own experiences seeing butterflies in the palace gardens. For those few minutes, the weight of her grief lifted slightly, replaced by the simple joy of connecting with a child who was facing her own impossible challenges with remarkable courage. When it was time to leave, Emma's mother walked them to the door. "Thank you," she said quietly, tears in her eyes. Emma has been talking about this visit for weeks. It gave her something to look forward to, something happy to focus on. Then, more hesitantly, she added, "I read about your brother. I'm so sorry for your loss. I know what it's like to face losing someone you love. It's the hardest thing in the world." Kate felt her own tears threatening again, but she managed to keep them at bay long enough to thank the woman and promise to return for another visit. In the car ride back to the palace, Kate was quiet. William reached over and took her hand, not saying anything, just letting her know he was there. Finally, Kate spoke. "That little girl is dying, and she was worried about curtsying properly. She should be complaining about homework and fighting with siblings, not counting down her days in a hospice. It puts things in perspective, doesn't it?" William squeezed her hand. "James would be proud of you today. You showed up even though it was hard. That takes real strength." That night, after the children were in bed, Kate and William sat in their private sitting room with cups of tea neither of them was drinking. The silence between them was comfortable but heavy with unspoken thoughts. "Do you think it will always hurt this much?" Kate asked suddenly. William considered the question carefully. "I don't know," he admitted. "When my mother died, people kept telling me it would get easier with time. They were right, but not in the way I expected. The pain doesn't go away exactly. It just becomes something you learn to carry. Some days are heavier than others, but eventually you find you can bear the weight." Kate leaned her head against William's shoulder, drawing comfort from his solid presence. "I keep thinking about all the things he'll miss. He'll never meet our children's future spouses, never be an uncle in the full sense of the word. He won't be at George's coronation someday, won't give Charlotte away at her wedding. All these future moments that he should have been part of, and he's just gone from all of them." Her voice cracked on the last word, and William pulled her closer. "But he'll still be part of those moments," William said firmly. "We'll make sure of it. We'll tell the children stories about him, share memories, keep his spirit alive in our family. He might not be physically present, but his influence, his love that doesn't just disappear." Kate wanted to believe him, wanted to find comfort in the idea that James would live on through their memories. But in that moment, it felt like cold comfort compared to the warm reality of having her brother in the world. The following weeks brought a gradual return to routine. Kate attended engagements, smiled for photos, and spoke eloquently about the causes she supported. To the outside world, she appeared to be coping well, resuming her duties with grace and determination. But William saw the truth. He saw how she would suddenly stop mid-conversation, her eyes going distant as a memory overtook her. He noticed how she avoided certain topics that might remind her of James, how she flinched when someone mentioned siblings, how she kept her brother's last text message on her phone and read it obsessively when she thought no one was watching. The text was simple, sent just days before the accident. "Proud of you, sis. Love you loads." 8 words that had become Kate's most precious possession. She had responded with a heart emoji and a promise to call him that weekend. But the weekend had come and gone without that call, and now it would never happen. The guilt of that missed opportunity gnawed at Kate, a constant reminder of all the things left unsaid. Michael and Carol visited often, and these visits were both comforting and painful. They would sit together as a family, sometimes talking about James, sometimes carefully avoiding his name, all of them navigating their grief in different ways. Pippa struggled to be there for Kate while dealing with her own loss, and Kate felt guilty for leaning on her sister when Pippa was hurting too. The family dynamic had shifted, altered irrevocably by James's absence, and they were all trying to find a new balance. One evening, about 6 weeks after the funeral, Kate was reading to Charlotte before bed. The book was one James had given Charlotte for her birthday, a story about a brave princess who saved her kingdom. Charlotte loved it, asking for it night after night, and Kate read it even though every page was a bittersweet reminder of her brother's thoughtfulness. As she finished the story, Charlotte looked up at her with serious eyes. "Mama, is it okay to still be sad about Uncle James?" Kate set the book aside and pulled her daughter close. "Oh, sweetheart, yes. It's more than okay. It's important to feel sad when we miss someone. That sadness is how we show love for people who aren't with us anymore." Charlotte thought about this for a moment. "Will you always be sad?" Kate considered how to answer honestly without frightening her daughter. "I'll always miss Uncle James, and sometimes that will make me sad. But I'll also have happy memories of him that will make me smile. Both feelings can exist at the same time, and that's okay." Charlotte nodded slowly, then said something that took Kate's breath away. 2 months after James's death, autumn arrived in London with crisp air and golden leaves that carpeted the palace grounds. Kate found herself drawn to walking in the gardens, often alone in the early morning before the rest of the household stirred. These quiet moments had become essential to her survival, a time when she could drop the mask of composure and simply exist with her grief. During one of these walks, she encountered one of the palace gardeners, an elderly man named Thomas who had worked there for 40 years. He was tending to a bed of late-blooming roses, his movements careful and precise. "Good morning, Your Royal Highness," he said, straightening up with some difficulty. Kate smiled, a real smile this time, not the practiced one she wore for cameras. "Good morning, Thomas. The gardens are beautiful this time of year." Thomas nodded, looking around with obvious pride. "They are indeed. Though I must say, the roses are particularly special this season. It's as if they're blooming in defiance of the approaching cold, determined to show their beauty while they still can." He paused, then added more gently, "Much like us, really. We bloom when we can, where we can, even when circumstances aren't ideal." Kate felt something loosen in her chest. "My brother loved gardens," she said suddenly, surprising herself. "He was terrible at maintaining them, killed every plant he tried to grow, but he loved being in them. He said they made him feel peaceful." Thomas smiled. "Would you like to plant something in his memory? We have a section of the garden that's perfect for a memorial planting, something that will bloom year after year, a living reminder." The idea took root immediately. Kate spent the next week researching plants that James would have liked, consulting with Thomas about what would thrive in the palace gardens. She settled on a Japanese maple tree, its leaves turning brilliant shades of red and gold in autumn, James's favorite season. The planting became a small family ceremony, with William and the children joining Kate on a Sunday afternoon. George helped dig the hole, his small hands covered in dirt, while Charlotte carefully held the sapling steady as they filled in the earth around it. Louis, not quite understanding but wanting to participate, placed a smooth stone at the base of the tree. Kate stood back, watching her family work together to create something beautiful from their grief, and felt a glimmer of something that might have been hope. "Uncle James would have liked this," George said seriously, patting down the soil around the tree. "Even though he was bad at gardens, he would have liked having a tree." William ruffled his son's hair affectionately. "I think you're absolutely right. And now whenever we miss him, we can come sit under this tree and remember all the good times we had with him." Kate added softly, "And we can watch it grow and change, just like we will. It will be different in every season, but always beautiful, always there." That evening, Kate received a phone call from one of James's closest friends, a man named David who had been too grief-stricken to speak at the funeral. He had been in the car with James when the accident happened, had survived with minor injuries while James had not. The guilt was consuming him, he admitted through tears. He called to apologize to Kate, to tell her how sorry he was that he hadn't been able to save her brother. Kate listened as David poured out his heart, his words tumbling over each other in his desperation to be understood. When he finally fell silent, exhausted from the emotion of it all, Kate spoke gently but firmly. "David, what happened was an accident. A terrible, tragic accident, but an accident nonetheless. James wouldn't want you to carry this guilt. He would want you to live, to be happy, to honor his memory by making the most of the life you still have." "But how?" David asked, his voice breaking. "How do I live when he can't? How do I enjoy anything knowing he's missing out on everything?" Kate felt tears sliding down her cheeks as she recognized her own questions reflected back at her. "I don't know," she admitted. "I'm still trying to figure that out myself. But I think we do it by remembering that James loved life. He loved laughter and adventure and connection. Living fully, embracing joy when we can find it. That's not a betrayal of his memory. It's a tribute to who he was." After the call ended, Kate sat in the darkness of her sitting room, thinking about her own words. She had been so focused on her grief, so consumed by what had been lost that she had forgotten to consider what remained. She was still here. Her children were healthy and happy. William loved her with a steadiness that never wavered. She had meaningful work to do, causes she cared about, the ability to make a real difference in people's lives. James's death didn't erase those blessings. If anything, it should make her appreciate them more fully. The realization didn't make the grief disappear. The pain was still there, sharp and present, a constant ache in her chest. But alongside it, there was now room for other feelings too. Gratitude for the time they had shared. Appreciation for the lessons James had taught her. Determination to live in a way that would make him proud. It was a shift in perspective, subtle but significant, and it marked the beginning of a slow journey toward healing. William noticed the change. It wasn't dramatic. Kate didn't suddenly become her old self again, but there were small signs that she was finding her way through the darkness. She laughed at one of George's jokes, a real laugh that reached her eyes. She initiated plans to visit her parents rather than waiting for them to come to her. She began sleeping through the night more often, the nightmares that had plagued her becoming less frequent. The palace communications team tentatively suggested that Kate might want to give a speech about her experience with grief. It would help others who were struggling with loss, they argued, and show the human side of the royal family. Kate's first instinct was to refuse. Her grief felt too private, too raw to share with the world. But then she thought about all the letters she had received from people who had lost someone they loved. They had shared their pain with her, had opened their hearts in hopes of providing comfort. Maybe she owed them the same honesty. She agreed to the speech, but insisted it would be on her terms. No grand venue, no formal ceremony. Instead, she would speak at a small charity event for a grief counseling organization. The audience would be people who understood loss intimately, who wouldn't judge her tears or expect her to have all the answers. William supported the decision completely, though he worried about how difficult it would be for her. Kate spent days writing the speech, trying to find words that captured the complexity of what she had been through. She wrote about the shock of loss, the way grief could hit at unexpected moments, the guilt that came with surviving when someone you loved had not. She wrote about the importance of allowing yourself to feel the pain, rather than pushing it away, about the value of having people around you who could sit with your sadness without trying to fix it. But she also wrote about hope, about the small moments of light that could break through even the darkest days, about the way love persisted even after death, transforming into memory and legacy, about the strength that could be found in vulnerability, in admitting that you were broken and needed help to heal. She wrote from the heart, with an honesty that would have been impossible a few months earlier. The night before the speech, Kate was pacing in her sitting room, too nervous to sleep. William found her there, her notes spread out on the table, tears streaming down her face. "I can't do this," she said when she saw him. "How can I stand up there and talk about James when I can barely say his name without falling apart?" William sat down beside her, taking her hands in his. "You can do this because you're one of the strongest people I know. You've been through hell these past few months and you're still standing. That's not nothing, Kate, that's everything. But what if I break down in front of everyone? What if I can't get through it?" William smiled gently. "Then you break down and we'll be there to catch you. The people in that audience have all been through their own losses. They'll understand. And honestly, I think seeing you struggle, seeing you be human and vulnerable, that might help them more than any perfectly delivered speech ever could." Kate leaned against him, drawing strength from his presence. "When did you become so wise?" she asked with a watery smile. William chuckled. "I've always been wise. You've just been too busy being amazing to notice." They sat together in the quiet room, neither speaking, just being present with each other. It was in moments like these that Kate felt most grateful for her marriage, for having a partner who didn't need her to be strong all the time, who loved her even when she was falling apart. The next morning dawned bright and clear, the kind of autumn day that James had always loved. Kate took it as a sign, a small blessing from wherever he was now. She dressed carefully in a navy blue dress that was elegant but not too formal, wanting to strike a balance between her royal role and the personal nature of what she was about to share. William would be there, sitting in the front row, his presence an anchor she could return to if the emotion became too much. As she stood backstage, waiting to be introduced, Kate felt her brother's presence with her in a way she hadn't since his death. It wasn't supernatural or mystical, just a sense of certainty that he would want her to do this, that he would be proud of her for using her platform to help others navigate the darkness. Kate cleared her throat and began to speak, her voice steady despite the emotion threatening to overwhelm her. Good morning. I want to start by thanking you all for being here, and for the incredible work this organization does in supporting people through the most difficult times of their lives. A few months ago, I would have attended an event like this out of duty, believing in the cause but not truly understanding it. Now I stand before you as someone who has lived through the kind of loss that changes everything. She paused, gathering her courage. My brother James died 3 months ago in a car accident. He was young, healthy, full of life and plans for the future. One moment he was here, texting me silly jokes and making plans to visit, and the next moment, he was gone. There was no warning, no time to prepare, no chance to say the things I had always assumed I would have time to say later. In an instant, my world was shattered, and I have spent these past months trying to pick up the pieces. The room was completely silent, every person focused entirely on her words. Kate saw tears on several faces and felt her own eyes grow wet. I want to be honest with you about what this journey has been like, because I think there's value in truth even when it's painful. Grief is not neat or linear. It doesn't follow a schedule or respect your obligations. It hits you at the most. Unexpected moments, a song on the radio, a favorite food, a turn of phrase that your loved one used to say. You think you're okay, and then suddenly you're not okay at all. In the early days, I couldn't imagine how I would survive. The pain was physical, a weight on my chest that made it hard to breathe. I would wake up each morning and have to remember, all over again, that James was gone. And that fresh realization felt like being stabbed in the heart repeatedly. People meant well, but their words often felt hollow. Time heals all wounds, they said. He's in a better place. You have to be strong for your family. All of it was true in its way, but none of it helped in those first raw weeks. Kate took a sip of water, her hands trembling slightly. What did help was allowing myself to feel the full weight of my grief. Our society often encourages us to push through pain, to put on a brave face and keep moving forward. And yes, eventually that becomes necessary. But first, I had to let myself break. I had to cry until I couldn't cry anymore. I had to talk about James obsessively, sharing stories and memories until my family probably wanted to scream. I had to sit with my sadness rather than running from it. I also had to learn to forgive myself for all the things I couldn't change. The phone calls I didn't make, the visits I postponed, the simple "I love you" messages I didn't send because I assumed there would be time. Guilt is a natural part of grief, but it can also become a prison if we let it. James wouldn't want me to spend my life tormented by regret. He would want me to remember the love we shared, not the moments I missed. She looked directly at William, drawing strength from his encouraging smile. I'm fortunate to have an incredible support system. My husband has been my rock, holding me up when I couldn't stand on my own, crying with me and for me, never once making me feel like I needed to hide my pain. My children, in their innocence and wisdom, have reminded me every day that life continues, that there is still joy to be found even in the midst of sorrow. My parents and sister, who are navigating their own grief, have shared this burden with me so that none of us had to carry it alone. But I'm also aware that not everyone has that kind of support. Some of you may be grieving alone without family or friends who understand what you're going through. Some of you may be surrounded by people who care, but don't know how to help. That's why organizations like this one are so crucial. They provide a space where grief is acknowledged and validated, where you can share your pain without judgment, where you can learn from others who have walked this difficult path before you. Kate's voice grew stronger as she continued. I want to talk about something that took me a long time to accept. It's okay to feel joy again. It's okay to laugh, to enjoy a beautiful day, to find pleasure in small things. For a long time, I felt guilty whenever I experienced happiness. How could I smile when James couldn't? How could I enjoy anything when he was missing out on everything? But then I realized that denying myself joy wasn't honoring James's memory. He loved life, loved laughter, loved seeing the people he cared about happy. Living fully, embracing the good moments when they come, that's the best way I can honor who he was. That doesn't mean the grief goes away. 3 months later, I still have days where the loss feels as fresh as it did in the beginning. I still tear up when I see something that reminds me of James. I still reach for my phone to text him before remembering that he won't text back. But alongside that pain, there is now also gratitude. Gratitude for the 28 years we had together. Gratitude for the memories we made. Gratitude for the lessons he taught me about kindness, loyalty, and unconditional love. Kate paused, looking around the room at all the faces watching her with such understanding. If you're here today because you've lost someone you love, I want you to know that you're not alone. Your grief is valid, no matter how long it's been. No matter what anyone else says about moving on or getting over it, there is no timeline for healing, no correct way to mourn. You will find your own path through this darkness, and some days that path will be harder than others. That's okay. That's normal. That's being human. I also want you to know that seeking help is not a sign of weakness. Talking to a counselor, joining a support group, taking medication if you need it, all of these are acts of courage, not surrender. For too long, we've been told to suffer in silence, to handle our pain privately. But grief shared is grief diminished, even if only slightly. There is power in speaking our truth, in letting others witness our pain and say, "I see you, I understand, you're not alone." She took a deep breath, preparing for the most personal part of her speech. I want to share something that happened recently that changed my perspective. I was visiting a children's hospice, meeting with families who are facing unimaginable challenges. I met a little girl who is dying, who has every reason to be angry at the unfairness of life, but who was excited to show me her butterfly collection and share her dreams about the future, even though she knows that future is limited. Talking to her and her mother reminded me that suffering is universal. We all face loss, all experience pain, all struggle with the fundamental unfairness of existence. But we also all have the capacity for resilience, for finding meaning in the midst of chaos, for choosing to love even though love makes us vulnerable to loss. That little girl was facing her mortality with more grace than I had shown in facing my grief, and she inspired me to be braver, to embrace life more fully, to stop waiting for the pain to pass before allowing myself to live again. Kate's voice grew soft, intimate, as if she were speaking to each person individually. Here's what I've learned in these difficult months. Love doesn't end when someone dies. It transforms, becomes memory and legacy, shapes who we are and how we move through the world. James is gone, but his influence remains. I see him in my children's kindness, in the values he helped instill in them during his too brief time as their uncle. I feel him when I make decisions about my work, remembering how proud he was of the causes I supported. I hear him in the advice I give myself during difficult moments, wisdom he shared with me over the years. He lives on in me, and in everyone whose life he touched. That's not a metaphor or a comforting platitude. It's the truth. We are all shaped by the people we love, and that shaping doesn't stop when they leave us. In fact, sometimes it becomes even more pronounced, as we consciously choose to honor their memory through our actions and choices. James made me a better person while he was alive, and I'm determined to continue that work now that he's gone. Kate looked down at her notes, then made a decision and set them aside. The rest needed to come straight from her heart. If you're struggling today, if the weight of your grief feels unbearable, please know that it won't always be this heavy. I can't promise that the pain will disappear, but I can promise that you will learn to carry it. You will find pockets of peace, moments of joy, reasons to keep going. And on the days when you can't find those things for yourself, lean on the people around you. Let them carry you until you can walk again. Reach out to organizations like this one, to counselors and support groups, to friends and family who care. Don't try to shoulder this burden alone. There is no medal for suffering in silence, no prize for not asking for help. In fact, asking for help might be the bravest thing you ever do. It certainly was for me. She felt tears streaming down her face now, but she didn't try to hide them. I miss my brother every single day. I would give anything to have him back, to see his smile and hear his laugh one more time. But since that's not possible, I'm choosing to honor his memory by living the kind of life he would be proud of, by being there for my children the way he was always there for me, by using my platform to help others who are struggling, by allowing myself to feel both grief and joy, sadness and gratitude, loss and love. James's death has taught me that life is precious and fragile and unpredictable. We don't know how much time we have with our loved ones or in general. That's terrifying. 6 months had passed since James's death, and spring was beginning to bloom across London. Kate stood at the window of her sitting room, watching as George and Charlotte played in the gardens below, their laughter carrying on the warm breeze. Louis was with them, toddling after his older siblings with determined steps, occasionally falling but always getting back up. The sight brought a smile to Kate's face, genuine and unforced. The Japanese maple tree they had planted in James's memory was beginning to leaf out, delicate new growth emerging from branches that had looked dead just weeks ago. Kate had spent many hours sitting beneath that tree over the winter months, talking to James as if he could hear her, sharing her struggles and small victories, asking him for guidance she would never receive. Those one-sided conversations had become a form of therapy, a way to process her grief and maintain a connection to the brother she had lost. William came up behind her, wrapping his arms around her waist and resting his chin on her shoulder. "Penny for your thoughts?" he asked softly. Kate leaned back against him, comfortable in his embrace. "I was just thinking about how different everything looks in the light. 6 months ago, I couldn't imagine ever feeling normal again. I thought the grief would consume me completely, that I would never be able to see past the pain. But here I am, watching our children play and actually feeling happy about it. You've come a long way," William observed. "I'm proud of you." Kate turned in his arms to face him. "I couldn't have done it without you. There were so many times when I wanted to give up, to just stay in bed and refuse to face the world. But you were always there, gently pushing me forward, holding me together when I fell apart. You've been my anchor through all of this." William kissed her forehead tenderly. "That's what love is. Showing up even when it's hard, especially when it's hard. You would have done the same for me." The response to Kate's speech had been overwhelming. It had been shared widely on social media, with people from all over the world reaching out to thank her for her honesty and vulnerability. She had received thousands of messages from people who had lost loved ones, who saw their own grief reflected in her words, who felt less alone because she had been brave enough to share her pain. The palace had been inundated with requests for Kate to speak at other events, to become an official patron of grief counseling organizations, to use her platform to continue raising awareness about mental health and loss. Kate had accepted some of these requests, carefully choosing opportunities that felt authentic and meaningful. She spoke at support groups and hospices, visited families who had experienced tragedy, and used her public engagements to highlight the importance of mental health resources. The work was emotionally demanding, often leaving her drained and tearful, but it also gave her a sense of purpose that had been missing since James's death. She was transforming her pain into something positive, using her loss to help others navigate their own. One afternoon, Kate received a letter that moved her deeply. It was from Emma's mother, the little girl she had met at the hospice months earlier. Emma had passed away peacefully in her sleep, the mother wrote, surrounded by family and holding a photograph of Kate's visit that had been her most treasured possession. In her final weeks, Emma had talked often about the princess who had taken time to discuss butterflies with her, who had made her feel special and important. That visit had given Emma joy during a difficult time, and her mother wanted Kate to know what a difference it had made. Kate cried as she read the letter, grieving for a child she had barely known but who had touched her heart. But there was also comfort in knowing that she had been able to bring happiness to Emma's short life, that their brief encounter had mattered. It reinforced Kate's belief that small acts of kindness and connection could have profound impacts, that showing up for people in their darkest moments was one of the most important things anyone could do. She shared the letter with William that evening, as they sat together after the children were in bed. "Life is so fragile," Kate said quietly. Emma was only 7 years old. She should have had decades ahead of her, a lifetime of experiences and adventures, but she got 7 years, and from what her mother writes, she filled those years with as much joy and wonder as she possibly could. There's something beautiful in that, even though it's heartbreaking. William nodded thoughtfully. I think James would have appreciated that perspective. He always lived fully, embraced every experience, never took a moment for granted. In a way, he packed more living into his 28 years than some people do in twice that time. Kate smiled through her tears. He really did. I used to worry about him sometimes. Thought he took too many risks, traveled too spontaneously, never seemed to have a solid plan. But maybe he understood something I didn't. Maybe he knew that we're not guaranteed tomorrow, so we need to make the most of today. The anniversary of James's death approached, and Kate found herself dreading it. She had made it through birthdays and holidays, had survived the first Christmas without him, but the anniversary felt different. It marked a full year of living without her brother. A year of moments he had missed, of grief slowly becoming something she lived with rather than something that consumed her. The family planned to visit his grave together, a private ceremony to mark the occasion and honor his memory. On the morning of the anniversary, Kate woke early and went to James's tree. The sun was just beginning to rise, casting golden light across the gardens. The maple was in full leaf now, its branches swaying gently in the breeze. Kate sat down at its base, running her hands over the smooth stone Louis had placed there a year ago. "Hi, James," she said softly. "It's been a year. I can't believe it's been a whole year since I last saw your face, heard your voice, felt your hug. Some days it feels like you just left yesterday, and other days it feels like you've been gone forever." She took a deep breath, organizing her thoughts. "I wanted to tell you about everything you've missed, even though I know you probably already know somehow. George lost his first tooth and was so proud of himself. Charlotte started taking ballet lessons and is surprisingly good at it. Louis is talking in full sentences now, and he asks about you sometimes. He calls you Angel Uncle James because we told him you're watching over us from heaven. I hope that's true. I hope you're somewhere, somehow still connected to us. Mom and Dad are doing better. They have hard days still, times when the grief overwhelms them, but they're finding their way through it. Pippa is pregnant, did you know? You're going to be an uncle, or I suppose you already are, in whatever way that works where you are now. She's scared and excited, and I know she wishes you were here to meet your niece or nephew. We all wish that every single day." Kate felt tears sliding down her cheeks but didn't bother wiping them away. "I gave a speech about you, about grief and loss and learning to live after someone you love dies. It was one of the hardest things I've ever done, but also one of the most important. People told me it helped them, that it made them feel less alone. I think you would have been proud of me for doing it, for being vulnerable and honest in front of strangers. I'm trying to live the way you would want me to. I'm saying I love you more often, not taking people for granted, embracing joy when I find it. I'm working on causes that matter, trying to make a difference in whatever small ways I can. I'm being present with the children, really present, not just physically there, but emotionally engaged. And I'm allowing myself to be happy, even though you're not here to share that happiness. It took me a long time to understand that living fully isn't a betrayal of your memory. It's a tribute to who you were." William appeared at the edge of the garden holding 2 cups of coffee. He walked over quietly and sat down beside Kate, handing her a cup. They sat in silence for a while, both lost in their own thoughts. Finally, William spoke. "I think he knows how much you love him. I think he knows how hard you've fought to keep going, to honor his memory by living well, and I think he's proud of you." Kate leaned her head on William's shoulder. "I hope so. I really hope so." They stayed there for a long time, watching as the sun rose higher, and the gardens came to life around them. Other members of the household began to stir, the palace waking up to another day. But Kate and William remained in their peaceful bubble, connected to each other and to the memory of someone they had both loved. Later that day, the family went to the cemetery. Michael and Carol were already there when they arrived, standing hand in hand at James's grave. The headstone was simple but beautiful, engraved with his name, dates, and a line from his favorite poem about living boldly and loving freely. Flowers covered the ground, some from family, others from friends who had come earlier to pay their respects. George and Charlotte approached the grave solemnly, each placing a drawing they had made for their uncle. George's showed James playing football with him, a memory from before the accident. Charlotte's was of James with butterfly wings flying among the clouds. Louis, not fully understanding but sensing the importance of the moment, placed a toy car at the base of the headstone, one of his favorite possessions offered in innocent tribute. Kate knelt down, touching the cool stone with trembling fingers. "We miss you," she whispered. "Every single day we..."